In this presentation, I will cover the history of humanity, which will trace mankind from the end of the last ice age to the present time. For this purpose, we will use three primary points of view. These are the geologic point of view, in which we will discuss climate patterns, sea levels, and historical seismic activity. The migratory point of view, which will follow human patterns of life, archaeology, language, culture, and various other human elements. And finally, the celestial point of view, which will explore archaeoastronomy, celestial time patterns, and the gods. My goal is to show you that using these three primary points of view, which happen to overlap with perfect synchronicity, you can in turn discover the evidence that they provide, and that this theory will stand on its own merits and prove itself in the course of time. As such, I give it freely and without mental reservation for the world scholars as a roadmap and to the public in general. Please note, due to the scientific nature of this multi-part presentation, it is deemed necessary to front-load you with a goodly amount of historical, physical, scientific data. To this effort, I ask for the viewer's patience and indulgence. Please feel free to pause slides in order to absorb the data. Please note, all chronological times herein discussed are scientifically accepted approximated times. For example, when I say 10,000 BCE, this means circa 10,000 BCE. Please allow me this indulgence, as dropping the word circa from the narration makes it for a much smoother presentation. Furthermore, all times are in the before common era format, as this is a non-secularized time format, and as such, equal and impartial to all philosophies and religions. Please note, for simplicity, this presentation uses a three-dimensional spherical model. However, it can be equally explained from both a geocentric or heliocentric point of view, or with a two-dimensional flat Earth model, or a multi-dimensional infinite plane model, or from an inverted point of view of any of these, as it is just a matter of shifting the points of view, or in other words, rearranging the equation from the mathematical point of view. As such, please feel free to view the Earth from whichever point of view you, as the observer, choose to view it. In part 1, we will discuss in chronological order some major events of the Pleistocene Epoch and transition into significant events of the Holocene Epoch, as well as discuss cyclic events and finally the evidence of the Great Flood and many other floods. Please note, it is necessary for you to understand the synchronistic relationship between geologic time and zodiacal time. To begin, you must familiarize yourself with Milankovitch cycles. In short, these physical scientific cycles postulate that the Earth goes through predictable climate patterns of freezing and thawing periods. These massive cycles are approximately 400,000 years in length, with smaller nested 100,000 year epochs and further nested smaller cycles, such as the 24,000 sidereal year. Overall, this is hypothesized to be caused by a change in solar radiation based upon three primary factors, those being the Earth's rotation and ecliptic revolution around the Sun, the change in the obliquity of the Earth, which equates to more extreme seasons, and the change in Earth's axis due to axial precession. It should be noted that these temperature changes happen more quickly on land than in oceans, which is a direct contributing factor in regard to human patterns of life. Now, the modern scientific terminology of the Milankovitch cycles corresponds to various Hindu sidereal descriptions of an elliptical yuga cycle, the only difference being in varying orders of magnitude. For example, on the bottom right of your slide, you can see a sidereal elliptical yuga cycle of 24,000 years, which corresponds to the sidereal axial precession of the equinox. A simple scaling of these cycles gives us the scientific 100,000 year planetary precession, 112,000 year apsidal precession, and the 400,000 year Milankovitch precessional cycles. However, it should be noted that in Vedic cosmology, the scale or order of magnitude continues to a 4,320,000 year Maha Yuga or Mega Yuga, which equates to 1 day of Brahma and proceeds to the maximum cycle of 300 trillion 40 billion years, which is 100 years of Brahma or an age of Brahma. And it should not go unnoticed that these sidereal elliptical precessional cycles create the shape of an egg, and that Brahma was born from the golden egg named Hiranyagarbha. Thus, modern scientific and ancient Vedic cosmology corroborate, yet vary only in order of magnitude. Now, the Pleistocene epoch lasted from 2,580,000 years before present up to 9,650 BCE or before Common Era. And the geologic record shows that the Earth went through 11 major glacial events and many minor advances and retreats. At their peak, continental glaciations pushed to the 40th parallel, with the mean annual temperature at the edge of the permafrost at 0 degrees Celsius or 32 degrees Fahrenheit, and at the edge of the ice at negative 6 degrees Celsius or 21 degrees Fahrenheit. Each glacial advance tied up huge volumes of water in the continental ice sheets, approximately 9,800 feet thick, resulting in temporary sea level drops of over 300 foot or more over the entire surface of the Earth. Here is a visual of the 40th parallel for your reference. It boggles the mind to imagine that during the end of this epoch, and only 12,000 years ago, the Andes mountain range in South America was covered by the Patagonian ice cap, that there were glaciers in New Zealand and Tasmania, that the current decaying glaciers of Mount Kenya, Kilimanjaro, and Rwenzori Range in East and Central Africa were much larger, and that in Africa, glaciers existed in the Atlas Mountains to the west and in the mountains of Ethiopia to the east. Following the pattern of Milankovitch cycles or Yuga cycles, and fast forwarding through time to 18,000 BCE, we can see that Earth was in its last glacial maximum at the tail end of the Pleistocene Age. At this time, massive ice sheets spread over much of North America and Eurasia and covered 25% of Earth's landmass, while average global temperatures were about 5 degrees Celsius or 10 degrees Fahrenheit colder than present. Moving forward in time to 10,000 BCE, or 12,000 years ago, the Pleistocene Epoch ended and the Holocene Epoch began, with a period of global warming at the end of the Younger Dryas that around 9,600 BCE caused the simultaneous collapse of the ice sheets, which flooded the greater part of the Earth. Continuing through our timeline, we see that in 8,700 BCE, the Earth reached its maximum ecliptic obliquity, which is a major factor in the Milankovitch cycles. Also consider that in 8000 BCE, the mean sea level was 180 feet lower than the present level. Now from 7000 to 3000 BCE, the Earth experienced what is known as the Holocene climate optimum, which was a thermal warming period where the Earth paradoxically experienced warmer than average temperatures in the northern hemisphere during the summers, yet the tropics and parts of the southern hemisphere were colder than average. During the middle of the Holocene climate optimum, in the North Grippian era of 6200 BCE, began with what is called the 8.2 kiloyear event, in which the remnants of the North American Laurentide ice sheet collapsed and caused a meltwater pulse, which in turn began a rapid 400-year cooling period until 5800 BCE, in which during the midpoint of 6000 BCE, Earth reached its thermal maximum, and the effects of this can be seen in 5600 BCE, when the Earth had a sudden sea level rise of 45 feet, which among many other geologic transformations expanded the Black Sea. Here we should note that almost every culture on Earth has a great flood story, most famously captured in the biblical story of Noah's flood. However, it is also as equally intriguing to ponder that most cultures also have a celestial boat in their cosmology, the most known in the Western world being the great ship Argos of Greek mythology, while the Egyptians have the boat of Osiris and the Hindus also have a boat. And even more intriguing is that they are all located in the same portion of the heavens. So what is going on here? Well, geology explains the sequence of the flood, but what explains the cause of this geological change? For this, we have to look to the stars and the celestial point of view. What we find is that around 10,000 BCE, Vela X, a supergiant star, went supernova and for many decades was the brightest star in the sky. Compare this to Sirius, which is our current brightest star. When Vela X went supernova, it would have no doubt been an awesome spectacle to the eyes of Neolithic man. Now, Vela X is located in the sails of the great ship Argos, which covers a large portion of the sky, from the zodiacal sign of Cancer all the way to Scorpio, and to which the celestial ship skims along the Milky Way before it dips below the southern horizon. Now that we have discovered the celestial event, The final piece of this puzzle is understanding the fractal of the heavens. Now, what is meant by this? Well, did you know that the brightest objects in the sky are all feminine? Our moon is the brightest moon in the sky. Venus is the brightest planet. Sirius is the brightest star. Vega, which is the Egyptian goddess Mot, is the brightest pole star. And Vela X would have been the brightest star at the time of its supernova. And even moreover, we find that the brightest objects are fractally synchronistic with water, which is feminine, for it is the moon that is associated with the waxing and waning of the tides, menstrual cycles, and human emotions in general. And Venus rules Libra, which is cardinal air, but provides the moist winds for the sails of the Argos as it plunges directly due west beneath the waves. Not to forget that Venus is also exalted in mutable water sign of Pisces, and looking directly due north towards the sign of Cancer, cardinal water, ruled by the moon. We find that it is here that Sirius rises, which corresponds to the annual flooding of the Nile in Egypt and the ancient rivers birthed from the Himalayas in India. And Vega, or Mot, was the North Star when Vela X went supernova, and thus the ice caps melted en masse, and the Great Flood ensued. And this fractally manifested from a celestial point of view, with the Ark of Noah, of Osiris, of Jason, of Vivasvata, Manu, and the Sumerian Magellan boat, the ship of the netherworld, and the great boat of the west, and so many others which we will discuss, which all celestial descend directly due west, with the moist Libra wind blowing into the velum sails of the great star boats. And if you can understand the celestial point of view, then you will understand that this solves the Hawaiian mythical Nu'u, who built a giant canoe or houseboat and escaped the Great Flood. He landed his vessel on top of Mauna Kea on the Big Island, the highest peak in Hawaii. Nu'u mistakenly attributed his safety to the moon and made sacrifices to it, while Kane, the creator god, descended to earth on a rainbow and explained Nu'u's mistake. And this solves the flood associated with Chinese mother goddess Nua, who was the twin and sister wife of Fuxi, where Fuxi was appropriately recognized by the Jesuit missionaries of the figurative movements of the 17th and 18th centuries as Enoch. And Fuxi, or Enoch, or Mercury, is the originator of the I Ching, the inventor of the kanji system of Chinese characters, music, and many other things. Together, Fuxi and Nua were the first man and woman, and made humans out of yellow clay, which would sound very familiar to the Western ears and hearts as Adam and Eve in the garden. In the Chinese celestial mythology, there was a great war in heaven between the gods, which resulted in the collapse of the four pillars of heaven and a resultant great flood. Nua patched the holes in heaven with 5 colored stones, those being the 5 elements, and mended its pillars with the 4 legs of a turtle, the tortoise being a fractal expression of your very own heart. And here it is that we can solve the celestial mystery of the mythical Noah and his ark, for it is the same celestial flood that comes directly due west, where humanity loses its consciousness every great year or the corresponding yuga cycle, and the raven of the dove stand as celestial testament to the event. And this solves the most ancient Egyptian myths of Khnum, and for that matter, the god Nu and the goddess Nun. He was the source of the Nile, the father of Ra, the sun, and created humans from clay and blood, forming them with a potter's wheel. And the birds associated with his myth are his son Ra, who is the falcon, and the Banu bird, or the phoenix. And the mythical Noah is the Sumerian Zasudra, king of Sumer and Shuruppak, modern tale for Ra, who experienced a physical, localized Mesopotamian flood in his kingdom of Shuruppak around 2900 BCE, and it is he and his priests who retained the knowledge of the last great flood and memorialized it by building a massive ark 6,300 foot up on the side of Mount Ararat, the highest peak in Anatolia. The chronological evidence is that he reigned 2900 BCE. A localized flood is archaeologically attested to by river strata from Shuruppak, Uruk, Kish, and other local sites, and are radiocarbon dated to 2900 BCE, and the wood of the boat located on Mount Ararat dates to 2900 BCE. It should also be mentioned that as the king of Sumer, he would have also had the means and resources to accomplish this achievement. According to most Sumerian kings lists, Zasudra was the last king of Sumer prior to the flood. He reigned for 3,600 years, which in mythical speak is code for Mercury, or Nebo, or Nebu, or Nibru, or Nibiru, which has a cycle of 3,600 years. And after the flood, King Zasudra came to dwell on Mount Ararat, or alternately on the mountain of Dilmun, Paradise, the mountain of the east where the sun rises, which in mythical speak means your pineal gland. Now, King Zasutra's father is Ubaratutu, who is Mercury, an apparition in the sign of Libra, who reigned for 18,600 years. Now, Ubaratutu is also attributed as the father of Shuruppak, the person, and the Utnapishtim, and Ubaratutu is the son of Inman Durana, Lord of the powers of Duranki, Duranki meaning the meeting place of heaven and earth, or literally the bond of above and below, which is the earliest evidence of the Hermetic motto of as above, so below. He reigned for 43,200 years, a fractal order of magnitude of a yuga cycle. The Sumerian mythical king, Enmen-Durana, or Mercury, is known as the mythical Semitic Enoch, both of which are seventh on the list of generations, and both of which were taken up to heaven and become immortal. Enmen-Durana, or Mercury, held significance among the early Sumerians as he was the ancestor from whom all priests of the Libran sun god, Utu-Shamash, had to be able to trace their descent. And this solves the Hellenized version of Dasudra as King Xisuthros, who reigned for 64,800 years and who built a reed boat that perched in the Corcyraean mountains of Armenia, of which the highest peak is the 13,435-foot Mount Aragats, not Ararat, Aragats. And this solves the Sumero-Akkadian myth of Utnapishtim, or Pyranapishtim, found within the Epic of Gilgamesh around 1800 BCE. Utnapishtim was the last antediluvian king of Sumer, or Shurpak, and was tasked by Enki, Lord Earth, to build a giant boat called the Preserver of Life, so that the rays of Shamash, or Utu Shamash, the Libra sun, the setting sun, would not shine inside. And this solves the Babylonian Atrahasis, king of Shurpak, whose boat came to rest on Mount Namush, sometimes Red Nasir, east of Assyria, now identified as Pyre Omar Gudrun in Kurdistan. In his flood story, the lesser gods plowed a field for 40 years, but growing tired of working, Enki suggested that humans be created to do this job, to which the mother goddess Mami created man by shaping clay figurines mixed to the flesh and blood of the slain god Geshtu-E Mercury, who was the god of intelligence, whose name means the ear of wisdom. All the gods then spit upon the clay, and after 10 months humans were born from a special womb. When Enlil, who was Venus, decided to kill humanity, it was Enki, the Earth Lord, who came to our rescue and told Atrahasis through a reed wall to tear down his house and build a boat with a roof like the Abzu, or the Abyss. Tracing east from Kurdistan over the Zagros Mountains into modern Iran, this solves the old Avestan myth of Yima, the Shining Light, the first king of Iran, who ruled for 300, then 300 more, equaling 600, then 300 more, equaling 900 years, and who built a vara, which is an enclosure, to save the world from the harsh winter and associated floods. And over time, the Avestan hero Yima became the Shah Yamshid of Persian legend and mythology, who was the fourth ruling king of the world and who divided people into four groups, and according to the great epic poem of the Shahnameh, was the greatest monarch the world has ever known. He had command over the angels and demons, and was endowed with the far, which is a radiant splendor that burned about him with divine favor. His subjects, all the peoples of the world, marveled and praised, and on March 21st, the vernal equinox, the Zoroastrian New Year, which is the first month of Farvardin, they first celebrated the holiday of Nowruz, or New Day, and in the variant of the Zoroastrian calendar, followed by the Zoroastrians of India, the first day of the month of Farvardin is still called Yamshid-e-Nowruz. And due north from Zoroastrian territory, this solves the Norse myth of Ymir, who was a primordial giant that was born from the venom of the icy rivers, and upon whose death caused the great flood. And from his flesh, which was the earth, was formed the world, and from his blood was formed the oceans and lakes, and that from his flesh blood dwarves were given life. It is also worthy to note that out of Ymir's sweat was born the primordial cow, whose teats produced 4 rivers of milk from which Ymir fed, those being the 4 cardinal directions in green on your slide. Now, it should really interest you that Yama, and Ymir is the word for twin, which firmly plants this version of the flood in the age of Gemini, the twins, which was around 6000 to 4000 BCE. And continuing eastward to ancient southern China, the primordial giant is Pangu, whose name means aboriginal abyss, who is the hairy, horned, tusked giant creator dwarf god in Taoism. He is first recorded in the time of Zhuzhang in southern China around 156 CE. Pangu was born from an 18,000-year-old cosmic egg and created the earth in another 18,000 years with the aid of 4 beasts, the turtle, the Kinyin, which is a chimeric dragon horse, the phoenix, and the dragon. He also separated yin and yang with the swing of his axe. And in Chinese astrology, it is Gemini that is associated with yin and yang. And just like the Norse Ymir and the Babylonian Tiamat, when Pangu's work was complete, he died and his body parts became the various parts of the earth. In particular, his blood became the rivers and his flesh became the land. Now, after the formation of the earth, 3 great rivers successfully governed the world. First the celestial, then the terrestrial, and finally the human sovereign. They were followed by Yongqing and Suijin, fireman, who brought down the fire from heaven and taught man how to use it. And even before Pangu was his older version in the Zhuang ethnic language, which says a brother named Pan, which means whetstone or square, and a sister wife named Gu, which means gourd or compass, became the only survivors of a prehistoric deluge by crouching in a gourd that floated in the waters of the flood. The 2 got married afterwards, and a mass of flesh in the shape of a whetstone was born. They chopped it up into pieces, turned it into large crowds of people who began to reproduce again. And this also solves Yu the Great, the ancient legendary mythical king of China that introduced flood control. He is the one that killed Xiangliu, the 9-headed snake monster that brings the flood, which is your mind. And wouldn't you know it, just as all the other flood myths, alcohol is invented as inebriation disconnects your consciousness, and in this myth, alcohol was invented during his reign. Yu was the son of Gun, which is the white horse, which is your hippocampus, and Qi, whose name means revelation. Hello, Qi. This celestial alignment also solves the mythical Emperor Yao, also known as Qi. Hello, Qi, who is said to have ruled for 99 years, yet is only first recorded in the records of the Grand Historian around 200 to 94 BCE. It was during his mythical reign that the Great Flood began, and was so vast that no part of Yao's territory was spared, and both the Yalu River and the Yangtze valleys flooded. And it was Emperor Yao who assigned astronomic officers to observe celestial phenomena such as the sunrise, sunset, and the rising of the evening stars. And from Emperor Yao to Yaldabaoth, the motif is the same. Yaldabaoth is the Yalda boat, who had a lion's head and a snake's body, and like all the rest, descended due west in Leo 12,000 years ago. For the Gnostics, he is the creator of the material world and chained your heart and soul into its mortal form. He was also the judge and torturer of the wicked souls in hell directly due west. And having traced the Mesopotamian versions eastward to Iran and the Ymir, Yao versions all the way over to China, we can triangulate the origin of this myth as having originated from India with the ancient Rigvedic myth of Yama or Yamaraja. Yama is the son of the sun god Surya, the twin brother of Yamuna, and the brother of Shradadeva, the 7th Manu, who is associated with Matsya, the first primary avatar of Lord Vishnu. Yama is the Hindu god of death and justice, both of which are attributes to the zodiacal sign of Libra. He is responsible for the dispensation of law and punishment of sinners in this abode, Yamaloka, or Yama's world. He is also spread widely throughout Asia and is known in every country where Buddhism is practiced, including China, Korea, Vietnam, Japan, Bhutan, Mongolia, Nepal, Thailand, Sri Lanka, Cambodia, Myanmar, and Laos. Now, in Vedism, the myth of Yama is also synchronistic with the flood story of Varaha, who is the 3rd primary avatar of Vishnu. In the Mahabharata, the single-tusked Varaha, who is called Narayana Vishnu, lifts the earth, which sinks under the burden of overpopulation when Vishnu assumes the duties of Yama and death seizes the earth. However, Varaha is most commonly associated with the legend of him lifting his consort Bhudevi, which is the earth goddess, out of the cosmic ocean after the demon Hiranyaksha stole the earth and hid her in the primordial waters. In another variant version, he is the boar that is sacrificed by Indra and Vishnu, and as such, Vishnu is known as the sacrifice and the bringer of sacrifice. And yet another version of Varaha is found, which states that the earth is lifted by a black boar with 100 arms. And finally, in Shaktiism, it is Varaha that bore Varahi, who is the feminine version of Varaha, and who also has the head of a sow. This also solves the Mesopotamian wild boar constellation found within the Babylonian Mole of Hen circa 700 BCE. The wild boar constellation sinks into the Libran abyss of unconsciousness and re-emerges from the Piscean abyss into Aquarian consciousness, the motto being I know, between the two Piscean fishes as the field, that is the field of consciousness. Know that the field is the Sumerian field of Enki, the Lord of Earth, because he is the Earth, whose number is 40. You know the 40 days and nights in the ark, the 40 years of Moses wandering in the desert before dying in the sight of Mount Nebo, which is Mercury, and the Promised Land, and the 40 days in the wilderness of the temptation of Christ. And this solves a Sumerian variant named Ninurta, or Lord of Urta. He was the son of Enlil, who is Venus, and Sud, which is a variant of Ziusudra, and who became Ninlil, the wife of Enlil. In his myth, he is the obliterator of the mountain, your Peniel, and the boat is the Magillam boat, and the bird is the Anzu bird, or the bird of the abyss, that stole the tablet of destinies. And this solves another localized Sumerian variant named Ningirsu, Lord of Gifsu. In his mythological story, we find a direct reference to the fluid released by the honeycomb structure surrounding your pineal gland in the line that says, quote, semen ejaculated by the great mountain. His story involves the creation of humans from clay taken from the Eden Canal along the Euphrates. Does this sound familiar? And this solves yet another Sumerian generation named Ningishita, or Lord of Kishzida, who is Zasudra, or Suda, or Sud. He was married to the beer goddess Ninkashi. His story is also associated with the Magellan boat. Notice in the bottom left of the slide some specific lines from his mythology which clearly tell humanity that confusion due to unconsciousness will come in the future, but that you are also able to keep check on the coming black-headedness of unconsciousness. And still another Sumerian variant of Nanazu, or Lord of Azu, solved. He was the son of Enlil and an Enlil, and it was Enlil who was known as the Great Mountain, which is the pure place, a reference to your pineal. It is this mountain, the pineal mountain, that, quote, exudes the allure of the high hills. And we can solve another Sumerian variant named Dumuzi, or Dumuzi Abzu, or Damu, or Ama Usmogal Ana. He was the brother-in-law of Utu, the Libran sun, and his wife was Inanna, or Venus. Beginning in July to August, which was the month associated with him, people all across Sumer would publicly mourn his impending death when he descended below the western horizon and into the netherworld. It is here that Mercury is in apparition, and where he is known to take a troublesome ghost with him. His resurrection by Inanna, or Venus, was celebrated on the vernal equinox during the Akitu festival, Sumerian New Year, where the king, a stand-in for Dumuzi, had ritual sex with the priestess of Inanna, who played the role of Inanna, to consummate the sacred marriage. In his story, we find the specific anatomical fractal in that the boat of heaven is identified as the female vulva. And if you think the Song of Solomon is erotic, it takes a backseat to the sacred rites of Dumuzi and Inanna. And in Old Babylonian, it was Tammuz, who was Mercury, that was killed every year by a wild boar and resurrected in the springtime by Ishtar, who was originally the star Sirius, but whom the Babylonians amalgamated into its lower order of fractal version of Venus. Tammuz was known to the Semitics and Phoenicians as Adonai, who became the Greek Adonis. And so it is that Adonis is solved, as he carries the exact same motif as all the others. In his particular myth, the phoenix is his father, and Aphrodite, who is Venus, is his wife, who later had twins with Ares. Alternately, Adonis's father is identified as King Cinyras, who, while in a drunken inebriation, was tricked into having sex with his daughter, which produced Adonis. And most telling is that ultimately Adonis was slain by a wild boar while on a hunting trip. And Dumuzi, as Adonai, dovetails into the Greek cult of Adonis and Attis, in which both of them were killed by a wild boar at the autumnal equinox, and the cult center of Demeter, which celebrated the ancient festival of Thesmophoria, also known as the Bitching Festival, which traces to 1100 BCE, and to which the festival was also held annually at the autumnal equinox. It was exclusively for and by females, and men were not allowed to attend under the penalty of death. The female ritual was equal to the Eleusinian Mysteries and dedicated to Demeter Thesmophoris, being a title meaning lawgiver, and held by her and her daughter Persephone, who were together called the two goddesses. The ritual involved sacrificing piglets to Demeter, which would be put into a cave to rot, and which during the next season would be brought out to be incorporated into farmers' fields for fertility. On the first day, they set up a city of women away from town of prying eyes, building structures out of plant material. On day 2, women would fast to purify themselves, and on day 3, they held the bitching ritual, which was dedicated specifically to the goddess Calogenia, whose name means beauty born, and who was the nymph nursemaid of Persephone. Please know that the Greek Calogenia is a form of the Hindu Kali, the ultimate manifestation of Shakti, whose first attestation is around 600 CE, around the same time as the Greek Calogenia. The Babylonian wild boar is also the Greek Arimathian boar, who took the form of a shaggy and wild, tameless boar of vast weight and foaming jaws. The Arimathian boar was the fourth labor of Hercules, who was to bring the boar alive to King Eurystheus in Mycenae. For when King Eurystheus saw Hercules carrying the boar on his shoulders, he was terrified and hid himself in a bronze vessel, as the boat. In the primitive highlands of Arcadia, where old practices lingered, the Arimathian boar was a giant, fear-inspiring creature of the wild that lived on Mount uh, Erymanthos, the fourth tallest mountain in the Peloponnese Peninsula, a mountain that was once sacred to the mistress of animals, for in classical times it remained the haunt of Artemis and the story of Meleager. When the goddess turned a wrathful countenance upon a country, Artemis would send a raging boar which laid waste to the farmer's field. Traveling due north from Greece, we reached the Norsemen, who told the tale of Golembursti, the golden-bristled, fearsome-toothed boar, whom Freyr, who is Venus, lashed to a chariot and rode to Balder's funeral. Golembursti was created by the dwarf brothers, who threw a pigskin into a hearth, from which Golembursti emerged. The boar had bristles that glowed in the dark, and there was no reach that could become so dark with night that the boar's glowing bristles and mane would not illuminate, and by default this also solves the Dutch fairy tale of the fair Prince Fro, who is Venus, who sculpts with gold the pig with the golden bristles. And this solves the Dandera line of the abyss, which descends directly due west on the Dandera zodiac, which was originally located in the Chapel of Osiris and the Temple of Hathor at Dandera, Egypt. Notice that the Dandera zodiac features 4 women and 4 falcon-headed gods arranged at 45 degrees from one another, and which together hold up the heavens. Notice that the outermost ring is composed of the 36 deacons, the 36 archons of the Gnostics, which count the 36 distinct 40-minute hours. This solves the Hindu Matsya, the first of the 10 primary avatars of Vishnu. His earliest attestation is found within the Shatapada Brahmana, around 700 to 500 BCE. The Shatapada Brahmana is also considered to be significant in the development of Vaishnavism, as the origin of several Puranic legends and avatars of the Rigvedic god Vishnu. Notably, all of them, Matsa, Kurma, Varaha, Narasimha, and Vamana, are listed as the first 5 avatars in the Dashavatara, the 10 principal avatars of Vishnu. The Shatapada Brahmana, Vishnu Purana, and the Matsya Purana contains a dedication to Varaha, the 3rd principal avatar of Vishnu, and a plea of rescue by the earth. And just as Matsya in his boat, this solves the Greek Matyasan, or Yasin, or Jason, and his boat, the Argo. Jason was the great-grandson of Hermes, who is Mercury, and in Hindu is Vishnu, or Buddha. And it should be of particular interest that the fractal of Jason's name is located in the Greek sky, in the same location as the Argo, spanning July, August, September, October, and November. And Jason's myth holds all the same common elements, he being a last man and spawning a new race, and two sets of twins, a wedding, to the boat, the dove, the field, and a giant. So what does the flood myth mean? Well, from one point of view, the ancients were telling you about a wormhole. That wormhole was found in many motifs, the most prominent being the celestial locations of the Sumerian Abzu in the west and a field in the east, both being visually composed of a square with three lines of water. But other cultures have captured it in their own motifs, such as the Egyptian Book of the Netherworld with He Who Hides the Hours, and in the Jewish culture with the Kabbalistic Tree of Life. And still, there are many more. But the most important wormhole you should be concerned with is the one between your pineal and your heart, as all of these are located inside of you. And moreover, the flood will happen again and again and again. For just as the solar seasons come in divine order every year, so do the higher fractal of the celestial seasons with the great year, or yuga. And the evidence is best captured in the epic Death of Gilgamesh, who told you that the unavoidable flood awaits you. The unavoidable battle between good and evil awaits you. In 12,000 years from now, humanity will once again fall asleep into unconsciousness of who and what it is. And when the light of God is hidden, wickedness will manifest in those who choose to do wicked. And while the unavoidable battle is not your choice, how you conduct yourself during the flood of unconsciousness is your choice. Now, when you plot the migratory course of the stories of Yama and the Boar and all the others, the epicenter of evidence draws back to India. And what you find is that the only source that has all of these deities is the Rig Veda, the oldest Veda. This information alone disproves any Aryan invasion theory, and instead is solid evidence that after the Younger Dryas, a human migration pattern came from the warm tropical climate of the 24th parallel of India and seeded into the thawing northern latitudes of the world. And it should be self-evident that the myths and gods come with the migrations. And here's a geographic visual that shows that evidence. For example, at the top right of your slide, if you start with the Rig Veda, which has a star above it, you will notice that King Sudas and the War of Ten Kings is the proto-script for the Mahabharata War and also for the Judaic Abraham and the War of Nine Kings. Or that Deus Peter can be traced from the Rig Veda to Zeus, the Greeks' primary god. And at the bottom of your slide, you may refer to this left to right linear pattern for you to follow. Now follow the same pattern on this geographic slide and discover the migrations of Yama, Matsya, Noah, and many others. Of particular significance is the Silk Road or Royal Road, which provided the method of dispersal, and King Cyrus the Great, who the Jews recognize as the Messiah, provided the means, as he allowed the cultures that he conquered to retain their beliefs and worship how they see fit. So, if you want to know how the Semitic Noah became the Chinese Nua, follow the course of the Royal Road religions. And here's a fractal unfoldment of many of the gods for those who prefer a simple linear chart. In conclusion, the science shows that Velo X went supernova in the great celestial ship 12,000 years ago and was followed by a physical flood on this earth and many other periodic floods. And looking due west on your celestial charts, you will find that the gods or god-men ascribed to the flood are none other than the various attributes and aspects of Libra, Saturn exalted, Venus ruled, Mercury apparition. And if you take anything away from this presentation, the major takeaways are outlined on this slide. The most important being the final bullet point that in 12,000 years from now, the flood of unconsciousness will happen again. And here are some questions to ask yourself in order to orient your mind. Ask yourself, how is it that all the world's flood myths have the same specific motif? How is it that, with exception, they always have a boat involved, alcohol involved, a feast or banquet involved, hello, Last Supper, incest, or some other sexual immorality involved with it? Always three offspring produced, always twins involved, always birds involved, always a mountain involved, usually the highest peak or the central peak, and always the same numbers as well. Quite frankly, we didn't even get into metaphysics on the matter, such as the inherent relationship of the words such as boat and boar and oar, or why in the Western world we celebrate our harvest feast with ham and yams and say yum, or how the three sons of Noah are none other than Yama, Shamash, and Ptah, or from the planetary point of view, the moon, the sun, and the earth itself. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your time. My website is celestialvision.info. Please remember to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments section.